Hello, and welcome to the Voice of South Coast Women, sponsored by the Bristol County Commission on the Status of Women. I'm your host, Gail Fortes from the YWCA Southeastern Massachusetts. And today we're going to talk about women's representation in Hollywood. So we have a great panel that's going to discuss the 2015 nominees for the Academy Awards. So if everyone could introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Dr. Juli Parker. I'm the Assistant Dean of Students and Director of the Center for Women, Gender, and Sexuality at UMass Dartmouth. I have had a long interest in the representation of women in all forms of media, theater, film, television. I have a lot of interest in this subject, and I'm fascinated by it.
Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Ashley Bendixson. I work for the Bristol County District Attorney's Office. In my spare time, I run a nonprofit theater company, which I love, and I'm also involved in a lot of different women's advocacy groups, including serving on the board of directors with Gail at the YWCA. I run their Leading Ladies program, which is a young women's leadership initiative program, and I'm involved in a lot of different causes that have to do with women's empowerment and women's advocacy.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Eunice, and I'm a commissioner on the Bristol County Commission on the Status of Women. And I think it's really important for us to scrutinize the industry, the film and TV industry, to see how women are being portrayed or not portrayed at all. And I think it's especially important for young women who are growing up to see maybe themselves in the media, so that they have good representation and have good role models.
Hi, I'm Jane Gonsalves. I'm a YWCA board member, recently retired from the New Bedford City Council, and a feminist and a film fan.
All right, thank you. So we're going to talk about the Academy Award nominees, and we're going to use the Bechdel Test to rate them. So maybe, Julie, you could tell us a little bit about what that test is?
Certainly. So the Bechdel Test is a test that was developed in the 80s by a comic writer named Alison Bechdel. And she did it initially as a joke to present this comic about the lack of representation of women in movies. And she put together these 3 questions. 1, the movie has to have at least 2 women in it. 2, they have to talk to each other. And 3, they have to talk about something other than a man. Since the 80s, it has been developed a little bit further where the women actually have to have a name in the movie. So we're going to apply this test to the movies that were nominated for Best Picture. All of us have seen 1 or 2 of the movies, and we're going to discuss that today. And then maybe we'll talk a little bit more about how the Bechdel test has been expanded to look at the representation of people of color in Hollywood movies as well, where we also know that we're really struggling as a culture to have good, positive representation.
Okay, well, wonderful. So this is going to be an exciting show. So we have a lot of films to talk about. So Eunice, we'll start with you. Sure. You saw The Big Short. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Did it pass the test?
No. I think it actually miserably failed the test. Not to say that it's a bad movie, because I actually enjoyed it a lot, but the female characters in the movie were, there just weren't that many. And even the main characters they had a short amount of lines and short amount of screen time. And most of the time, the women were used as props. So in one scene, they use Margot Robbie, who is an Australian model/actress, to explain these complicated financial terms as she's sitting in a bubble bath. So, and the main character, who is played by Ryan Gosling, actually says, since these financial terms are so difficult to understand, let's have a beautiful woman who is naked in a tub explain these terms so you pay attention and don't fall asleep. In another scene, there are actually 2 women talking to each other in 2 scenes, but we don't know their names because they're just lead-ins to another scene full of men, and we don't even know what they're saying. It's completely inaudible dialogue. And I would say the main female character who played Steve Carell's character's boss, she was amazing, and she had she was a strong female character. She played, she was his boss in Morgan Stanley in that firm, and yet every time they had an interaction, and she was played by Adeb Pereira-Oduyo, I believe that's how you pronounce her name, and every time she was in a scene, though, Steve Carell would mention something about her trying to have kids, or, oh, congratulations, you're on your baby. And even when the camera moved to the desk behind her where she had her Harvard diploma, of course, next to it was her husband and child. So all of her accomplishments were completely downplayed to say like, oh, well, you know, she is still, after all, just a wife and a mother. So I thought it was interesting in that regard. But
in a nutshell, like, what was the movie about?
oh, so I'm sorry. So The Big Short was actually based off of a book that described the actual financial crisis that happened starting in 2007, I believe. And so it's a true story. I'm actually in the middle of reading the book right now, and even though the characters in the film, their names were changed from the book, the characters were largely pretty much the same. So this is a real life story with real life people.
Okay. Well, thank you, Eunice, for that insight.
Interesting. You paid like really good attention to this movie.
Thank you.
Bravo.
Thank you.
Great. All right, Jane, why don't you tell us a little bit about...
Well, I'm kind of excited because I actually get to talk about a woman film, that's woman-centric and that does pass the Bechdel test with flying colors. That's Brooklyn, Brooklyn. And it's also a great movie. So Brooklyn is a story, it's a coming-of-age story. It's also about immigration. It's set in post-war Ireland in the United States, and it's about the immigration of Irish people into the Brooklyn area during that time. And our lead character is Eunice, and she's about 18, 19 years old, and her oldest sister, Rose, saves the money to send her on a passage to America because, as she says, there's nothing here for you. They are a poor, working-class family, and one works in a shop, the other's a bookkeeper, and she sends her, and so she has to leave her family and go to America. So there are many things that come up, and as a sidelight, what's interesting about the movie, again, it's woman-centric. When she goes to America, the priest, of course the Catholic Church has a big role in it, the priest finds her a job and finds her a place to live, but the place she lives is a boarding house full of women. And it's an interesting thought because it's a widow who takes girls in to pay the rent. But she's really providing a service. She's showing herself as an independent woman who's able to keep her house, in post-World War II United States, which is kind of impressive in itself, She has a name also. So there are more than 2 female characters that are named in this movie, and they all speak to each other about a lot of things. Although with a house full of 18 and 19 and 20-year-old women, you can imagine that a lot of the conversation is about men and about makeup and things like that. But Eunice goes on to get a job, and then the priest gets her tuition to pay for her to go to night school, and she is the only woman in a class full of men taking a bookkeeping course to get a college degree. So on every level, this film speaks to women's accomplishments, and she makes decisions on her own and makes a decision where her heart is and where she wants to be, either in the United States or in Ireland. It's really a good film, and it does pass the test.
Awesome.
All
It
right,
looks
that's
really
great.
good.
Yeah.
I want to see it.
Well, that's good. So we have one that passes the test.
1 to 1. 1 to 1.
1 and 1. All right. So
And she is nominated, by the way, the lead character.
is nominated for.
The lead actress, who I can't say her name, Charisse Ronan. I don't know how to pronounce her first name, but she is nominated for Best Actress.
Oh,
Great.
okay, great.
Awesome.
All right, Julie, why don't you tell us about The Martian?
All right. So I saw The Martian right after it was released on DVD. And it is a good movie. I think like Eunice, recommend seeing it, although it barely passes the Bechdel test. There are a few strong female characters in the movie. The movie's about Matt Damon, who gets stranded, left behind on Mars during a trip there where they're, looking at, I don't know what they're looking at. They're looking at the Earth and, they're trying to do astronauty things on Mars. And
Is that a technical term?
yeah, right. So they have to leave because there's a storm coming, and basically they're running out to their escape pod, and the wind comes up, and this panel hits Matt Damon, and he gets left behind. And they assume for dead because there's only so long that you can last, right, in your suit.
Sure.
So there's a very strong character in the woman who plays like the press person for NASA, who's Kristen Wiig, and I believe. And then the lead commander of the spaceship is a woman. Her part is excellent. She has a great part. I think it's a good movie to see just for a positive role model of a female scientist. And then there's another woman astronaut who's also on the ship. So while a lot of their conversations are about rescuing this man on Mars, they're also talking about how to do it. So there's conversations about, you know, how do we get back to Mars? How do we land? How do we do this? And it's kind of a spoiler alert, but they don't know for a long time that he's alive. So NASA knows he's alive, but they never tell the astronauts who think they've left their poor comrade, you know, to die out there. And of course, it kind of reminds me a little bit of the movie with Tom Hanks and the volleyball. When he was left on the Castaway, because it's kind of one man's, you know, surviving on a you know, distant place or what have you. But it is very interesting and it's very funny. Matt Damon's very funny in the movie, so it does barely pass the test. I think it's a good C. Both of those women do have names. I don't have their names written down, but I would give it a, you know, a
thumbs up,
a tiny thumbs up.
All right, so we got two to one.
2 to 1.
2 to 1 so far. Okay, Ashley, why don't you tell us about The Room?
Sure. So I was really excited to go see Room because I read the book probably about, I would say 4 or 5 years ago, because it was on the bestsellers list. So I've been waiting for this, because it's funny, I read the book and I remember saying, God, this needs to be made into a movie. And so I've been waiting for this to become a movie. So I was so excited to go see it. Room is, so the woman that wrote Room is Emma Donoghue, and she was inspired to write this book after hearing of this case in Austria where this woman, Elizabeth Fritzl, was held captive by her father for 24 years in the basement of their family home. Basically, he lured her into the basement and said, I need help carrying this door. She helped him downstairs. She was like 18, 19. And while she was holding the door, he sealed it, and that was the last piece of the chamber that he was keeping her in. So he sealed it. He like put something on her face, was it petroleum ether or something, and pushed her into the chamber, and that was it. And so, you know, they filed a missing persons report, and the mother thought that the girl just ran away, like the wife was living in the house and had no idea all these years. So for a period of 24 years, he assaulted her, raped her, and actually impregnated her with 7 children. Oh my God. So long story short, they were able to escape because one day she talked him into like letting them out because of some kind of health emergency with one of the kids, and so like the woman was able to basically talk to the police at the hospital. But one of the kids that was brought out of this, you know, state of captivity was only 5 years old. So she was, the woman that wrote the book was really inspired to write this story in the view of a 5-year-old and what it's like to grow up in a confined space. So Room is basically, the book and the movie are told through the perspective of the 5-year-old child. Okay. So he wakes up in the morning and he's like, you know, good morning lamp, good morning table, you know, good morning snake. And the snake is like, you know, broken eggshells that the mother has like sewn together with a needle and thread. And basically they just play games using like just recycled materials. And so that's the bulk of the movie. The movie is basically the mom, who's in her 20s, and Jack, who's 5 years old, and they live in this room. It's a shed. And the story in the book is, you know, this guy basically tricked her when she was a teenager, her senior year, into helping with a sick dog, and that was that. So the bulk of the movie is just those 2 characters. It does pass the Bechdel test. However, like, I think it's kind of questionable because the only other female characters in the movie, eventually they're able to escape. She reunites with her mother, and then there's a female police officer that's involved in this, but they don't interact. But she does speak with her mother. They both have names, but they talk about the effects of the trauma on her. So that's considered passing. However, like the effects of the trauma is her being kidnapped and held captive by a man. So I would say it fails, but according to the Bechdel test and their website, they've said it does pass. But it's a great movie. I would recommend anyone seeing it. It is not, the lead actress, she is nominated for Best Actress, which is great.
Is it trauma-inducing?
I wouldn't say so, no.
Okay.
It's very powerful, but like you don't witness him like coming in and like raping her, you know, because it's like something's going on, but the film is like Jack hiding in the cupboard, like waiting for it to end. So yeah, but it's pretty amazing. Yeah, so it was great.
Okay, well, thank you, Ashley. Juli, tell us about The Reverend.
So The Revenant, we decided not to see this movie because there is no way that it passes the Bechdel test. There's one named female character in the movie. She's a girl who's raped. She's kidnapped and raped on screen, and she has one line of dialogue. And basically, there's a flashback to another female character, but it's basically about men's relationships with other men and a bear, who I also believe is a female, but she doesn't talk.
And she doesn't have a name.
And she doesn't have a name. So, you know, you couldn't drag me to a movie like that, to be honest with you. So I think we decided with the movies that we had to see, we would try to see the ones that we were wondering whether they would pass or not, and this one straight up fails the Bechdel test. And I've read a lot of reviews about how people are very disappointed at the nomination of this movie. That the notion of kind of the man, you know, struggle alone in the wilderness piece has been done before, and how
It's Leonardo DiCaprio. I mean,
Yeah,
that's what it's all about. Yeah. I think that's what it is, probably. But
so that would be
think-
it. So that would
that's
be
a-
that's a fail.
so that's a fail. Okay. All right. So I think Jane and Ashley, you both saw Spotlight. So maybe
So
you can
good.
You want to start?
talk about that. You both can jump in.
Sure. Yeah, so Spotlight is based on a true story, and it's pretty accurate as far as like the names are the same, and it's based on a team that still works for the Boston Globe. They're an investigative unit that does months of research and covers these, you know, big investigative stories. And basically, this goes into when Spotlight uncovered the church sex abuse scandal. And what's so amazing, and it's one of those movies where like it's like you know it happened, and then the more you learn, you sit there and think like, oh my God, how did I not know all of this? And they started looking into what they thought was just one priest who had been basically covered up and moved around after these allegations, and they ended up uncovering 87 names just in the Boston area, 87 priests. So it was an amazing movie. I don't know about you, but like when it ended, they showed lists of all these other investigations and things that have taken place, and the whole screen just had a list of places all over the world, and I was like, oh my God.
Well, there was like
And
2
then
pages because the first
another screen popped
was
up.
United
And
States.
another.
Then there was
And it was just
Then- yeah.
the movie ended, and I was like, and I just started crying, and I looked around, and everybody was just like, I mean, it was powerful. I thought. I keep hitting my mic.
Absolutely, and it's interesting because on that investigative team, now this was set in the 2000s. There was one female reporter, and I believe she still works at the Boston Globe because I recognize the name. I've seen her byline, Sasha Pfeiffer. She's played by Rachel McAdams, and so she's surrounded by men. But interestingly enough, she's able to get things that other people don't, and she approaches things very differently than the male reporters do, which is a whole nother thing that's interesting about the way she approaches her investigative part of her job, you know, as far as how she approaches people. She just walks up and knocks on the door, and a retired priest, who's also an abuser, answers the door. And she talks to him, and he's willing to talk to her. He's clearly not in his right mind, but he's willing to talk to her, and until his sister comes and grabs her and throws her out. But that's an interesting, because it wasn't really the way that the male reporters approach things. But it is interesting to see that, and then the interaction with her family, and particularly her grandmother, who is not named. And so on the Bechdel website, we see reviews from different people, some who think that the movie passes because there is interaction between Sasha and her grandmother, but the grandmother is not named, and the interaction is about the church. So there is
the male
question about whether
priest.
that really passes or not.
Does it count if her name is Grandma?
It actually, she calls her Nana. She calls her Nana.
Maybe they
so,
consider that
yeah.
a
Yeah,
name.
maybe that could
Yeah.
be considered. Fine line
So,
there.
I mean, I think that it's an important story, but for the purposes of this, it's questionable whether it passes, but it is such an important story.
Okay.
Yeah.
And a great movie.
Oh, sounds like a
Absolutely.
great movie.
And the accents aren't too bad
No.
for the actors that came from out of New England to
do the
do it.
Boston
Sometimes.
accent.
And is she nominated? I think she is.
She is.
Rachel
She's
McAdams.
nominated for
She's
Best Actress
nominated
or
for Best
Supporting
Actress.
Actress, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll get to actors and actresses in a second. We have a couple more movies to talk about. Julie, could you talk about the Mad Max one?
I will talk about Mad Max, but before that, I think we should just mention Bridge of Spies.
Oh, Bridge of Spies,
Yeah,
that's
which
right.
We
Why don't we do that one
also saw that it failed the Bechdel test as well, and it. Although again, another debate about how there's this one piece of the dialogue at the dinner table between the mother and the daughter, who are named, where the daughter wants to get a piece of bread and she says, "Not before Grace." So that one tiny little piece of the conversation, but I think overall it feels, again, about men, about Tom Hanks, right? He's a spy and he's got to go get somebody, and one of these kind of male adventure films. But Mad Max, I would say, probably like Brooklyn, I mean, steals the Bechdel test.
Yeah.
They're calling it the feminist Mad Max of 2015. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. I was not a huge Mad Max person back in the day. My partner loves Mad Max, always wants to watch it whenever it's on TV, and I'm like, it's just a bunch of men in dirt, you know, driving motorcycles. But this is like a renaming of that. I mean, basically, Charlize Theron is rescuing these women who are who have been taken in as chattel, basically, for this male, you know, group of, I don't know what you would call them, but they're this you know, these warlords kind of, and the women are being used basically either as milk producers, so they have a bunch of these women lined up who are just basically constantly producing milk, and then these young women who are they appear to be virgins are being used to be, you know, married to this kind of lead lord person. And Charlize Theron is there to rescue these young women, and Mad Max is helping her. And what's interesting too about the movie is that you often, like, you're watching this movie thinking, oh, there's going to be some weird love interest between these two, and it never happens. And so I was so excited about that part. Yeah, because I was like, something's going to happen between these two, and it never did. It was like they went their separate ways at the end. And so that I thought was like, yes! And you know, she's really powerful. She kicks a lot of butt in the movie, and I think it's a great representation of women taking charge, and you know, any of the conversing that they do is really about getting, you know, figuring out how to escape these, you know, men that are chasing them. So they're really not talking about men per se. They're really figuring out how to use the equipment and the tools that they have to get to a place that's safe.
Okay.
So. Thumbs up on that one.
Thumbs up on that one. So it sounds like we have a couple that are very clearly yes, very clearly we have some no's, and some maybe in between.
In between.
So we have some a little bit in betweens. So
can I add a movie that we didn't talk about, because it's not nominated for Best Picture, but it's a great role model picture, and I have to think about whether she actually talks to another female character about something other than man. I think she does. Joy. I don't know if anybody's seen the movie Joy, but Joy is the story of Joy Mangano, who was one of the first inventors for QVC, when QVC first started. And Joy comes from a middle-class family, but highly dysfunctional family, where the parents are divorced, the mother lives with her, the father's in and out, his girlfriend brings him home and dumps him there. She's got her ex-husband, her father, and her mother who don't speak to each other, all living in her house, and she's trying to raise her child there. And she is the only one, well, the father has a business, but the mother doesn't ever leave the room. So she's really, and the ex-husband's a musician, so she's the major breadwinner. And she's trying to raise this family, and she's broke and she's discouraged, but she has an invention, and she believes in the invention, and so does her ex-husband. The whole time her family knocks her down. Her father, her mother, they don't believe, her sister too. It's a very negative presence. They don't believe she's going to get anything out of it, do anything with it. She overcomes a lot of obstacles, and she becomes a multimillionaire, and she holds 111 patents. So it's actually, I think, a great movie to take a teen girl to, you know, a preteen girl, because it shows women, you know, that are successful, even over great odds, that they achieve something.
I've heard that her hangers are unbelievable.
Her hangers?
Yeah, I actually ran into someone who had seen the movie, and they were like, and I went out and bought the hangers, and she said she replaced all of her hangers in her closet, and she like made all this extra space with these hangers.
Interesting.
Yeah, they're this space-saving hanger. That's apparently incredible. And I also heard, I saw an interview with her, actually the real woman, that they wanted to have someone else sell her mop. And she was like, no, I'm the only one who can sell this. I should be the one to sell it. So there was this pushback about her being the person to represent herself, because she wasn't Hollywood. And she pushed them and got herself on television, and, you know.
In the movie, it was more like the exec from QVC was decided she should do it. But they wanted to glam her up. And she went into makeup and wardrobe, and then they had her in a suit with, you know, a very glammy kind of suit with heels to demonstrate a wet mop. And she's like, no. She changed out back into her clothes, just a blouse and slacks, and did it without the heavy makeup and the big earrings, and sold them up. And the first time she did it, she failed. But she got them to let her go back a second time, and she succeeded beyond anybody's expectations.
That's great.
Great.
And then she hired women from a church to make the mops. That was her first factory. That's her
Factory.
first assembly line.
That's awesome. Great.
That's a great story.
Great story. So why is that important to have women represented in these movies as lead roles, lead characters, and with not talking about men?
Well, I think that when you talk about a teenage girl or a girl, I think when they don't see people like them represented doing normal human stuff, they don't see a future for themselves. You know, like you can't. There's this tagline that the Gina Davis Foundation has that's like, you can't be what you can't see.
Right.
You know, so if you never see a female scientist, you only see male scientists, you never think, oh, I could be a scientist.
True.
So
Very
I
true.
think certainly that's one reason. I'm sure everybody has an opinion on this.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's very important for young women to have role models, and as much as I think we all hear and say, well, you know, we really shouldn't be watching so much television anyway, or you know, being so sedentary. But let's face it, the media is everywhere, and we can't deny that. And so having good role models, especially for young women to look up to, is very important. Like, you can be more than what. I mean, there really are no limits. Like, the limits are what you set on yourself. But like Juli said, if you can't see it, then how do you even know? Like, you need to be exposed to it. And I find it interesting that in two of the movies which are on this list, which are based on true stories, you know, The Big Short and Spotlight, even in real life, there are little to no female characters.
Right.
So, I mean, not characters, these are real people.
right.
And
Leadership,
so you think, I mean, I'm sure there are tons of young women who say, oh, I didn't know I could work on Wall Street. Or, oh, like, is that something people do? Is that something women do? I didn't realize that. And I think it is important. And not just to go into these fields and play a small role, but actually to go into them and, like Jane said, to be a leader or to actually make a difference.
Right. True. There's also a lack of female directors.
Yes.
We noticed that not any women were nominated for a director.
Again.
And you know, and that's unfortunate.
Yep.
And we've also, of course, we've all seen on TV the lack of minority representation for best lead actress and lead actor. In that, anyone have any comments or thoughts on either one of
Can I
those
just ask
issues?
maybe a dumb question?
No
The
dumb
director just takes a script and puts it into action, correct? So like, even though like Room was written by a woman, I mean, she created this whole story and the whole concept, but a man directed it for her. So that's, I don't know, I feel like she should get recognition for writing the story. You know what I mean?
Well, that's why they have a screenwriter
Screenwriters.
nominations and,
okay.
right? So adapted screenplay, original screenplay.
So the director just reads the script and just makes it happen?
Well, the director has a vision, though, for the project. I mean, for the movie, right? I mean, would you agree with that, Juli?
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
I think that's why directors send it such a revered position, and that's why, and it's so heavily male that in that position, you know.
And
So
I think,
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I was going to say, I think maybe that's partially your point, right, Ashley? Like that you have this position that is completely male dominated,
Right.
and you know, for something that they didn't write themselves. I mean, I'm sure they put a lot of effort into it, but it is this most revered position that is taken mostly by men.
I think there's a great example of that actually in the fact that people were upset about Carol not getting nominated, right? So you have this movie about a lesbian relationship back in the day, right? A man directed the movie, you know, so I felt like maybe that's part of the issue with this movie is that you are trying to represent this very female-centric relationship and you're putting it through the lens of a male who, I'm sorry, will never have that experience. And so, you know, does that change it? You know, does it change when you put a different gender into the subject material?
Imagine that
Imagine
if
that.
like both genders got the same script and both created the movie.
That would be really
that be really
interesting.
Interesting to see.
Yeah.
How,
And that
how
raises
different they
another
would
point
be.
that I think is important too, is that not only do we want to be role models and show that message to young girls and young boys as well, but there is also the issue that we need to have a farm team. You know, we need to draft women into these positions because I
like the
believe.
analogy.
Well, I've always used that expression, but for that. But I really believe that the lack of female leadership in certain industries affects how they operate, okay?
Yes.
In government, for
Right.
example.
Yes.
I'm a big believer
Higher
in that.
education.
And higher education, yep, government. But government, let me go to government. And, you know, some of it may be stereotypical, but I still believe that women, because we're raised the way we are, a lot of the times tend to be more consensus builders than men are. And so in legislative bodies that are male-dominated, the men tend to be all about winning and losing. It's about the numbers. How many votes do we have and who's going to win? And the compromise is not valued, and consensus building is not valued. And I believe that having more women in legislative bodies will make a difference in the way they operate, and there'll be less gridlock. That is my opinion. And I think that's one of the reasons that we need to encourage more women to get into leadership positions. So those movies and those representations in art about women doing things on their own, maybe surrounded totally by men, are important to those people that are struggling to get through that glass ceiling right now, that are operating out there alone and thinking they're alone and working in a male-dominated environment. It's important to show them and represent them now for them, for those grown-ups too, not just the kids coming along.
I know we're out of time.
Yeah, we're running out of time. I know the time goes by so quick.
So I would just say, though, I think that for me, it all boils down to, if you're going to represent humankind, you have to show both stories, right?
Absolutely.
And I think the problem with Hollywood in general is that we're only seeing half of the story.
Right. So I think this has been a great topic. I know we could probably do another show on this and talk
We could do
longer
an hour
and
on
longer.
this.
An hour on this, definitely. But we think it's important. You know, I think our goal of doing this show is to bring that to everyone's attention for our viewers, to let them know that we really need to advocate for our girls and our women to have leadership roles as actors, as screenwriters, as directors, and that role should be for anyone. It doesn't matter what the color of their skin is.
Right.
Why does a role have to be for a white person or a black person or a Latina? There should just be the best person that can do the best job with that role, whether it's male or female, lesbian, straight, bisexual, transgender, it shouldn't matter. And hopefully Hollywood will hear that and do something about it someday. Hear us, Hollywood. So thank you all for being on our show.
Thank
It's
you.
been a great show, and thank you for watching Voice of South Coast Women.